The priests pinned the widow to the ground to punish her until a cowboy came to save her. The sun rose slowly over the small, dusty village, casting long shadows across the narrow streets. Maria, a young widow, sat on the wooden steps of her tiny home, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her husband, a kind and hard-working man, had passed away suddenly just a few months ago, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly felt much colder and harsher. Life in the village had never been easy, especially for women who had to fend for themselves. Now, without the protection of her husband, Maria felt a mix of fear and determination every day. She had always been strong in her own quiet way. After her husband died, she worked hard to take care of the small garden behind her home, sold vegetables and handmade goods in the market, and tried to live a life that honored her late husband's memory. But the villagers, guided by the strict rules set by the priests, saw her independence as something unusual, even dangerous. In their eyes, a widow was supposed to be quiet, submissive, and always humble. Maria, however, spoke when she needed to, worked when she could, and tried to live with dignity. That alone made some people uncomfortable. The priests, men with long robes and stern faces, had always been figures of authority in the village. They believed they were responsible for keeping everyone in line, ensuring that no one disobeyed the rules of the church or the traditions handed down over generations. Maria had never caused them any trouble, but her refusal to bow to every expectation placed upon her made them suspicious. She had smiled at strangers, helped children who were not her own, and, worst of all in their eyes, had refused to remain silent about unfair treatment in the village. Rumors began to spread quietly at first. Some villagers said Maria had angered the gods. Others whispered that her independence was a bad example for younger women. Maria tried to ignore it, but it was impossible when the priests started making their visits to her small home, delivering harsh warnings about her behavior. She remembered one day in particular when Father Gabriel, the village's most respected priest, came to her door. "Maria," he said in his deep voice, "the path you are on is dangerous. You must remember your place as a widow. You must not step outside the boundaries that have been set for you. Otherwise, punishment will follow." Maria had looked at him calmly and replied, "Father, I honor my husband in everything I do. I am not harming anyone. I do not understand why my life must be controlled because I am alone." Father Gabriel had frowned, shaking his head, and left without saying another word. Maria knew that this visit meant trouble was coming. It was only a matter of time before the priests would take action if she continued to defy their expectations. As the days went by, the tension in the village grew. Villagers began to watch her more closely, judging her movements and the way she spoke to others. Some offered sympathy, but most remained silent, too afraid of angering the priests. Maria felt the weight of their eyes on her every day, but she refused to let fear control her. She continued to work in the garden, tend to her small stall at the market, and care for the children in the village who had no one else to guide them. On the morning that would change everything, Maria stepped outside her home, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables to sell in the market. The sun was already high, burning through the thin morning mist. She had noticed the priests gathering in the square, their long robes flowing in the wind, and she felt a knot of worry tighten in her stomach. She knew that when the priests came together like this, it was not for a blessing or a prayer. It was for a judgment. As Maria approached the square, she saw a crowd of villagers forming, their expressions a mix of curiosity and fear. Some children clung to their mothers, peeking out to see what was happening. The air was thick with tension, and even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her head high. She would not run. She would not hide. She had lived her life with honesty and kindness, and she refused to let fear dictate her actions. The priests stepped forward, their faces stern and unyielding. Father Gabriel spoke first, his voice echoing across the square. "Maria," he said, "you have disobeyed the teachings of our faith. You have walked a path that goes against the rules we uphold. For your own soul and for the example of others, you must face correction." Maria's stomach tightened, but she did not lower her gaze. "Father," she said quietly but firmly, "I have done nothing to harm anyone. I have lived my life with respect and care. I do not understand why I am being punished." The priests exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. They moved toward her with an authority that had been unchallenged for many years. Maria felt herself surrounded, the crowd of villagers silent and tense. She knew there was no one to protect her here, no one but herself, yet she stood her ground, refusing to show fear. And then it happened. The priests reached out and pinned her to the ground, using their numbers and their strength to hold her down. Maria struggled, but she was outnumbered. Her cries rang out, echoing through the square, and for the first time she saw some of the villagers flinch and look away, unwilling to intervene. She felt the hot sun on her face and the rough ground beneath her. But even in this moment of fear, her spirit did not break. She refused to stop calling for help, hoping that someone, anyone, would come to her aid. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Maria lay pinned, her heart racing and her breath coming in short gasps. She thought of her husband, of the life they had shared, and of the children she had cared for. She thought of all the days she had worked hard, helping others and living honestly, and she refused to let this injustice define her. Even in the face of cruelty, she held on to hope that someone would see her struggle and act. And then, far in the distance, she heard a sound that made her heart leap, a rhythmic pounding, growing louder with each second. It was the sound of hooves on the dusty road, fast and strong, cutting through the silence of the square. Maria's eyes widened, and for the first time, a flicker of hope appeared on her face. Someone was coming. Someone might be able to stop this madness. The priests, focused on their punishment, did not notice the figure approaching. Maria could only strain her eyes to see, but even from a distance she sensed a presence that felt different, strong, fearless, and determined. She clung to that feeling, telling herself that perhaps her suffering would end. Perhaps someone would help her stand again. For Maria, that morning was not just about fear and punishment. It was about courage, resilience, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, help could arrive from the most unexpected places. As the sound of the approaching horse grew louder, she realized that her story was about to change, that her fight for dignity and freedom was not over, and that her life, though tested, was far from over. Maria lay on the hard, dusty ground, her arms pinned by the firm hands of the priests. Her heart pounded like a drum, and her mind raced as she tried to think of what to do. Every muscle in her body tensed, but she was unable to move. The priests' faces were stern, filled with the certainty of authority. They whispered among themselves, chanting prayers, and reminding her of the sins she had supposedly committed by living freely as a widow. Maria's voice trembled as she spoke, pleading with them to stop, but her words were ignored. The villagers circled around, their expressions a mix of fear, curiosity, and unease. Many felt the injustice of the situation but dared not intervene. The priest's influence had always been strong, and few had ever dared to challenge them. Maria, however, refused to be silenced. She struggled beneath their grip, shouting that she had harmed no one and only wished to live a peaceful life. Her voice grew hoarse, but she refused to stop calling out for help. Time dragged slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Maria's arms and legs ached from being pinned, and the bright sun made her head spin. Despite the pain and fear, she noticed small gestures from the villagers: a mother shielding her child, an older man looking away in discomfort, a young boy clutching the hem of his mother's dress. These quiet signs reminded her that not everyone in the village agreed with the priest's actions. Even if they were too afraid to act, there were hearts that sympathized with her. The priest's chants grew louder, and they pressed her harder to the ground, insisting that she needed to be corrected for her defiance. They spoke in terms of morality and tradition, making it clear that they believed their actions were for the good of the village and her soul. Maria, though exhausted, held her gaze steady. She refused to accept that her life could be controlled by fear, that her choices could be judged by those who saw kindness and courage as disobedience. As she struggled to breathe beneath their weight, Maria thought of her husband. She remembered his gentle smile, the way he had always believed in her strength, and the encouragement he gave her to live honestly. That memory gave her a surge of determination. She whispered to herself, "I will not let them take my dignity. I will not give up." Her inner resolve grew even as her body weakened, and she knew that somehow she had to survive this ordeal. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the crowd. Some villagers began murmuring to one another, questioning the priest's authority. "Is this right?" one woman asked quietly. "Can they do this to her?" another whispered. Slowly, small seeds of doubt began to form among the watchers. The priests noticed the shifting expressions and frowned. They were so certain of their power that they had not expected any opposition, yet the unease in the crowd was growing. Maria's eyes scanned the square, searching for any sign of help. She noticed a young boy pointing toward the horizon, excitement and hope in his eyes. "Look! Someone's coming!" he shouted. The villagers followed his gaze, and Maria's heart leapt. In the distance, dust kicked up from a fast-approaching figure on horseback. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing across the village, breaking the heavy silence that had filled the square for so long. The priests stiffened as they noticed the rider. They whispered to one another, their confidence faltering slightly. Maria could feel the tension in the air shift, a flicker of hope stirring in her chest. She strained her eyes to see the approaching figure more clearly. A lone rider, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a determined expression, was heading straight for the village square. The man moved with purpose, his horse galloping with strength and speed, as if it sensed the urgency of the moment. Maria called out with what little strength she had left, hoping the rider could hear her. "Help me! Please! Someone help me!" Her voice was raw, but it carried over the murmurs of the crowd. The villagers, seeing her desperate plea, began to whisper among themselves, and a few stepped closer to the priests, though not yet daring to intervene fully. The tide, Maria realized, was beginning to shift. The rider came closer, and the details became clearer. He was a cowboy, rugged and strong, with eyes that seemed to see right through the injustice in front of him. His expression was serious, calm, and unyielding. Maria felt a surge of hope and relief. She had never met this man, yet somehow she trusted that he would not stand by while she suffered. As the cowboy approached the square, the priests exchanged nervous glances. They had never faced anyone who seemed unafraid of their authority. The villagers, sensing the tension, held their breath, watching carefully as the situation unfolded. The cowboy reined in his horse near the edge of the square, his presence commanding attention. He dismounted smoothly, his boots kicking up dust, and walked directly toward the priests and Maria. Maria's body ached, but the sight of him gave her the strength to lift her head and meet his gaze. In his eyes, she saw determination and courage, and she knew that help had arrived. The cowboy spoke firmly, his voice cutting through the chants and whispers. "Let her go," he said. "She has done nothing wrong." The priests were taken aback by his authority. They had expected compliance from everyone, and here was a stranger demanding that they release her. The villagers, emboldened by his presence, began to murmur in agreement. Some stepped closer, others simply watched, but the atmosphere had changed. The power that had seemed unbreakable moments before now wavered in the presence of courage and reason. Maria felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She struggled to sit up, testing the priest's grip, and felt them hesitate. The cowboy took a step closer, placing himself between her and the priests. His eyes never left theirs, silent but firm in their warning. Maria could sense that the moment of her rescue had arrived, though the danger was not yet over. The priests' faces flushed with anger and confusion. They argued among themselves, trying to find a way to maintain control. But the cowboy's calm confidence and the villagers' growing support made them falter. Maria, still pinned but no longer feeling entirely helpless, whispered words of gratitude to the man who had come to her aid. She did not know his name, but she felt that she owed her life and dignity to his courage. As the cowboy continued to confront the priests, Maria realized that this moment was more than a rescue. It was a turning point. The fear that had controlled her life for so long began to fade, replaced by the knowledge that justice and kindness could prevail, even in the face of cruelty. She felt a renewed strength within her, a sense of hope that perhaps the village could change, and that her life could continue without being dominated by fear and oppression. The villagers watched in silence as the cowboy's presence seemed to hold the priests at bay. Maria, though still pinned, felt the weight of the sun less harshly, her spirit lifted by the knowledge that she was not alone. Help had come, and the tide was turning. The moment was tense, but full of possibility, a promise that courage and determination could overcome fear and injustice. Maria closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath. She knew that this struggle was not yet over, but she also knew that she had witnessed the first step toward her freedom. The cowboy's arrival had changed everything, and for the first time in many weeks, Maria allowed herself to hope that her life could continue, with dignity, respect, and the chance to live on her own terms. The cowboy's boots crunched on the dusty ground as he stepped closer to Maria and the priests. Every eye in the village square turned toward him, the tension thick enough to feel in the air. He was a stranger, yet his presence radiated authority and courage. Maria, still pinned to the ground, felt a mix of fear and relief wash over her. She had no idea who this man was, but she knew that help had finally arrived. The priests exchanged uneasy glances. They had never faced anyone who dared to challenge their power so openly. Their whispers became hurried conversations, their certainty slowly cracking under the weight of the cowboy's calm, steady gaze. Maria could see their frustration, their surprise, and it gave her a small, quiet hope that the situation might finally change. "Step aside," the cowboy said firmly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "She has done nothing wrong. Let her go." "Bah? Father Gabriel." The lead priest straightened his robes and sneered, trying to hide his unease. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" he demanded. "You are a stranger. This is our village, and our duty is to correct those who stray from the teachings of our faith." The cowboy did not flinch. He kept his eyes fixed on Father Gabriel, his tone steady and unwavering. I do not need to be from this village to see that you are harming an innocent woman. Your duty is to protect, not punish. Release her, or you will face the consequences of your actions." Maria could hardly believe her ears. For weeks, she had lived in fear of the priests, feeling powerless as they imposed rules she had never agreed to. Now, this stranger had spoken words she had longed to hear, words that demanded justice, not submission. Her chest tightened with hope as she tried to sit up, testing the priest's grip. They hesitated, unsure how to respond to someone who did not fear them. The villagers began to murmur, their confidence growing. A few stepped closer, emboldened by the cowboy's courage. "Let her go!" one man shouted timidly. Others joined in, their voices soft at first, then louder as the priests wavered. Maria felt a surge of relief and pride. She had always believed that courage could inspire change, and now she was witnessing it firsthand. The priests tried to regain control, raising their hands and chanting louder, but their authority was weakening. The cowboy stepped closer, placing himself firmly between Maria and the priests. His presence was calm but unyielding, a silent promise that he would not allow harm to come to her. Maria's heart raced, and for the first time in weeks, she dared to hope that she might walk away from this ordeal with her dignity intact. With a deep breath, the cowboy reached down and gently grasped Maria's arm. "Stand up," he said softly but firmly. Maria obeyed, her legs shaking from the effort and the tension of the past moments. As she rose to her feet, she felt the sun on her face and the rough ground beneath her, no longer a symbol of her fear, but a reminder of her survival. The priests' faces were a mixture of anger and disbelief. They had expected obedience, and instead they were met with defiance, supported by strength. Maria, now standing with the cowboy beside her, felt a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. She could see the doubt creeping into the villagers' minds. Some began to question the priest's actions, wondering if they had been wrong all along. "You cannot do this," Father Gabriel said, trying to assert control. "This woman has broken the rules. She must face correction." The cowboy shook his head slowly. "You are confusing tradition with cruelty. She has broken no rules, except those you have made in your own fear and pride. Let her go. Now." The priests hesitated, glancing at the villagers who were watching silently but attentively. They realized that the balance of power had shifted. No longer could they act without question. The presence of the cowboy and the growing support of the villagers forced them to reconsider. Their chants faded, their hands lowered, and for the first time they looked uncertain. Maria, still holding the cowboy's steady gaze, felt her courage grow. She could see the fear behind the priest's eyes, the realization that their authority was not absolute. She could feel the support of the villagers, the quiet strength of those who had long been too afraid to speak. Together they created an invisible force that even the priests could not ignore. With careful movements, the cowboy reached for Maria's other arm, lifting her fully to her feet. "You are safe now," he said, his voice gentle. Maria could hardly believe it. After all she had endured, after the fear and pain, someone had come to rescue her. She looked at him, gratitude and relief shining in her eyes. The priests stepped back, their confidence broken. They muttered among themselves, unsure of how to respond. The villagers, emboldened by the cowboy's actions, began to murmur their support for Maria. "She did nothing wrong," one woman said aloud. "Leave her be." Others nodded, their voices growing stronger. Maria realized that she was not alone, that there were people in her village who believed in fairness and justice. The cowboy turned to face the priests one last time. "This ends now," he said firmly. Harming an innocent woman is not acceptable. She will leave this square unharmed, and you will respect her right to live freely." Father Gabriel looked around at the villagers, seeing their silent approval of the cowboy's words. His shoulders slumped slightly and he nodded, finally stepping aside. The other priests followed, their expressions a mix of frustration and reluctant acceptance. Maria could hardly believe her eyes. After weeks of fear and oppression, she was finally free. The villagers began to cheer softly, their voices growing louder as Maria stood tall beside the cowboy. Some clapped their hands, others embraced their neighbors, and the energy of the square shifted from tension to relief. Maria felt a warmth in her heart, not just from being saved, but from witnessing the courage and unity of those around her. The cowboy placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Maria nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced cruelty, fear, and injustice, but now she understood that courage, hope, and kindness could overcome even the greatest obstacles. As the villagers began to disperse, the cowboy turned to Maria. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, tears of relief and joy welling in her eyes. "I am," she said softly. "Thanks to you." He smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "Just remember, courage comes in many forms. Today it was mine to help, but tomorrow it can be yours to inspire someone else." With that, he mounted his horse, giving Maria a final nod of encouragement. Then, with a powerful push of the stirrups, he rode away, leaving her standing in the square, free and empowered. Maria looked around at the villagers, many of whom now approached her with smiles, apologies, and words of support. She realized that the courage of one stranger had not only saved her, but it had also sparked a change in the hearts of those who had once been too afraid to speak. The priest's power, though still present, had been challenged, and Maria could sense that life in the village would never be the same again. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maria walked slowly through the square. Each step felt lighter than the last. She knew that challenges would still come, that life would not always be easy, but she also knew that she had survived, that she had been brave, and that she had been reminded of the power of hope and courage. That day, Maria's life changed forever. She had faced the worst fear she had ever known, pinned and powerless before those who claimed authority over her. But with the arrival of a courageous stranger, she had been freed, her dignity restored, and her spirit renewed. And as she looked toward the horizon, she understood something she had long forgotten. Even in the darkest moments, help can come, and courage, both given and received, can transform lives. After the cowboy rode away, the square felt different. The sun had begun its descent, casting a warm orange glow over the village, and the once tense air was now filled with quiet whispers and tentative smiles. Maria stood in the center, her body still aching from being pinned, but her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Relief mixed with a deep sense of empowerment as she realized that she had survived the priest's punishment. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe freely. The villagers, who had watched silently for so long, began to approach her cautiously. Some offered apologies, their faces filled with guilt and embarrassment for not intervening sooner. "I am so sorry," a middle-aged woman said, her eyes downcast. "We should have spoken up before. We were afraid." Maria shook her head gently, offering a small smile. "It is not too late," she said. "What matters is that we act now, and we choose kindness and justice." Her words had a quiet strength that seemed to inspire the villagers. Others stepped forward, offering help in small ways. Some carried water for her, others offered to help with her market stall, and a few simply stood nearby, silent but supportive. Maria felt warmth in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced since her husband's passing. The village that had once felt so hostile now showed the possibility of change. The priests, however, were not so easily dismissed. They gathered in a small cluster at the edge of the square, whispering among themselves with furrowed brows. Their authority had been challenged in front of the entire village, and the fear in their eyes revealed how shaken they truly were. Father Gabriel, the lead priest, stepped forward slowly, attempting to regain some control. "Maria," he said, his voice quieter than before, "you must understand that our actions were meant to guide you. You cannot simply ignore the rules of our faith." Maria met his gaze, her voice steady and strong. "I have not ignored my faith, Father. I have only lived my life honestly and with respect for others." "That is not wrong. Your actions today were not guidance. They were cruelty. I will not allow anyone to treat me as less than human." The priests faltered, unable to respond. Their words, meant to intimidate, now sounded hollow. The villagers, emboldened by Maria's courage, murmured their agreement. One by one they stepped closer, standing beside her in silent solidarity. It was a moment Maria would never forget, the realization that courage and justice could inspire others to stand up for what is right. As the villagers rallied around her, Maria noticed a few familiar faces, children she had helped over the years, young women who had looked to her for guidance, and even some of the men who had once been skeptical of her independence. Their expressions were full of respect and admiration. For Maria, it was more than just relief. It was validation. Her life, her choices, and her resilience had made a difference, not only for herself, but for the community as a whole. With the priest still watching, Maria slowly began to walk toward her home. Each step was careful, but determined. She could feel the eyes of the villagers on her, some filled with curiosity, others with admiration. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows, and the golden light seemed to reflect the new beginning in her life. She felt a sense of liberation she had not known in months, a freedom that came not just from being released, but from being recognized for her strength and courage. Along the way, villagers offered words of encouragement. "You were brave," one young man said. "We should all learn from you." An elderly woman added, "You have shown us that doing what is right is more important than fearing authority." Maria nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She realized that her ordeal had sparked a quiet revolution in the hearts of those around her. People who had lived in fear were beginning to see that standing up for justice could inspire real change. When she reached her home, Maria paused to look back at the square. The priests had retreated to their place of authority, but their influence was no longer absolute. Villagers continued to gather in small groups, discussing the events of the day, sharing their thoughts, and beginning to question long-held traditions that had allowed injustice to thrive. Maria felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her struggle had not been in vain. Over the next few days, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Maria focused on her work, tending to her garden and her market stall, but she did so with a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. The villagers treated her with respect and kindness, no longer viewing her as someone to be controlled or punished. She found joy in small victories, helping a neighbor, teaching a young girl to read, sharing her knowledge with those who sought it. Each act of kindness reinforced her belief that courage and compassion could change the world. Maria also noticed subtle changes in the priests. Though they still held their positions, their demeanor had shifted. They no longer approached her with harsh judgment or threats. Instead, there was a cautious respect, a recognition that their authority could not be exercised through fear alone. It was a delicate balance, but Maria understood that true change often begins with small steps, and she was willing to take them. One evening, as Maria sat on the steps of her home watching the sunset, she thought of the cowboy who had come to her aid. She had never learned his name, yet his presence had left a lasting impact on her life. His courage had reminded her that even in the darkest moments, help could arrive from unexpected places. He had shown her that standing up for what is right sometimes requires someone to act boldly, even when the outcome is uncertain. Maria's reflection on the events of the past days brought a sense of peace she had not felt in months. She realized that while fear and injustice had once dominated her life, she now possessed the strength to face challenges with dignity and hope. The experience had transformed her, deepening her resilience and reinforcing her belief in the power of courage, kindness, and solidarity. In the following weeks, Maria became a quiet but powerful figure in the village. People sought her advice, admired her strength, and were inspired by her actions. She continued to live her life with honesty and compassion, teaching others through her example that fear and oppression could be overcome by courage and perseverance. The village, once steeped in rigid traditions and fear, began to change slowly but surely, as people learned to question authority and embrace fairness and justice. Maria never forgot the lessons she had learned during that terrifying day in the square. She understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. She knew that kindness and integrity could spark change, even in the face of those who sought to control or harm others. And she understood that sometimes the arrival of a single brave person, like the cowboy, could alter the course of a life and inspire an entire community. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her life had been forever changed, not only by the fear she had faced, but by the courage that had saved her. She had learned that strength, hope, and compassion could overcome cruelty and injustice, and that even in the most difficult circumstances, the human spirit could prevail. And though the cowboy had ridden away, leaving her with only the memory of his bravery, Maria carried his lesson in her heart. She would continue to live boldly, to stand for what is right, and to inspire others through her example. The village would remember the day when fear was challenged, justice was restored, and a widow's courage illuminated the power of hope, compassion, and resilience. The weeks that followed the dramatic events in the village square were filled with change, reflection, and hope. Maria moved through her days with a new sense of purpose and courage. The memory of being pinned to the ground by the priests still lingered, but it no longer brought her fear, only determination. She knew that her life had been forever altered, not only by the cruelty she had endured, but by the bravery of the cowboy who had come to her aid. Maria's mornings began early. She tended to her small garden, checking each plant carefully, nurturing the vegetables and flowers that had become her livelihood. The soil under her hands reminded her that growth takes patience, effort, and care. Just like the changes happening in her village, she would often pause and look toward the horizon, half expecting to see the cowboy riding into the village once again. Though she never did, his actions remained vivid in her memory, a constant reminder of the power of courage and justice. The villagers, inspired by what had happened, treated Maria with newfound respect. They came to her for advice and guidance, especially the younger women who had once felt trapped by the strict rules of the village. Maria spoke to them gently, encouraging them to live with honesty, kindness, and dignity. "Do not be afraid of standing up for yourself," she would say. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act even when you are afraid. The girls listened carefully, their eyes shining with hope, and Maria realized that her experience had given her a voice that could empower others. Even the children in the village began to look at her differently. They no longer saw a widow to be pitied, or a woman to fear. Instead, they saw someone brave and strong, someone who had faced danger and come through it with courage and grace. They would gather around her after school, asking her to tell stories or teach them new skills. Maria delighted in these moments, recognizing that by helping them grow, she was planting seeds for a future built on compassion and fairness. The priests, while still present in the village, had changed as well. Their authority had been tested, and they could no longer act with the same fear-inducing power as before. Father Gabriel, in particular, seemed more thoughtful and cautious. Though he continued to guide the villagers in religious matters, he did so with a softer approach. He no longer sought to punish or control, at least not in the same harsh manner as before. Maria noticed the difference and recognized that courage and truth could influence even those who once wielded power without question. Maria's daily routine included visits to the market, where she sold her vegetables and handmade goods. She did so with pride, carrying herself with confidence that reflected the strength she had gained. Villagers approached her respectfully, asking for advice on their own gardens or seeking her opinion on small matters. Maria listened carefully, offering guidance without judgment. She understood that her role in the village had shifted. She was no longer just a widow trying to survive. She had become a symbol of resilience and integrity, someone who could inspire positive change. Despite her growing confidence, Maria often found herself reflecting on the events that had brought her here. She remembered the feeling of being pinned to the ground, the fear that had seemed unbearable, and the moment when the cowboy had arrived to intervene. She realized that his courage had not only saved her life physically, but had also given her the emotional strength to reclaim her dignity. His actions had demonstrated that one person's bravery could create ripples of change that affected an entire community. As the months passed, the village slowly transformed. The villagers began to question old traditions and practices that had once been accepted without question. They realized that some rules had been used to control rather than guide, to instill fear rather than promote fairness. Small changes appeared in everyday life. Neighbors helping one another more openly, young women pursuing work and education, and children learning that kindness and respect were more important than blind obedience. Maria took quiet pride in witnessing this shift, knowing that her ordeal had played a part in inspiring these changes. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with deep shades of red and gold, Maria sat outside her home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The village was quiet, the only sounds being the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of a bird. She thought about the cowboy, imagining him riding across the plains, continuing his life with the same courage and integrity he had shown in the village square. She wished she could thank him once more, though she knew that he had moved on, leaving her with the gift of his bravery and the lesson it carried. Maria realized that courage is not always about grand gestures or heroic acts. Sometimes it is about standing firm in one's beliefs, speaking the truth, and helping others when they are in need. She understood that her own courage, combined with the support of those who had stood by her, had been essential in creating change. The cowboy had acted as a catalyst, but it was her determination and the villagers' willingness to question authority that had made the transformation possible. In the months that followed, Maria became more involved in the community. She helped organize small gatherings where villagers could discuss issues, share knowledge, and support one another. She encouraged young women to learn skills that would give them independence and confidence. She mentored children, teaching them the value of kindness, respect, and courage. Slowly, the village began to embrace a culture of fairness and cooperation, replacing fear with hope and empowerment. Maria also took time to care for herself, something she had neglected during her months of fear and hardship. She tended to her garden with care, cooked meals with love, and allowed herself moments of rest and reflection. She realized that self-care was not selfish, but necessary for maintaining the strength and resilience she needed to continue helping others. Her life, once defined by loss and oppression, was now guided by purpose, growth, and hope. Though she never saw the cowboy again, Maria often thought about him. She remembered the quiet courage in his eyes, the calm determination in his voice, and the way he had intervened without hesitation to protect her. His actions had shown her that even strangers could make a profound difference in someone's life. More importantly, they had taught her that courage is contagious, and that acts of bravery and kindness can inspire others to rise above fear and injustice. As years passed, Maria's story became part of the village's history. Children grew up hearing about the brave widow and the mysterious cowboy who had saved her. Parents shared her story to teach lessons about courage, integrity, and standing up for what is right. Maria herself remained humble, but she understood the significance of her experience. She had faced fear and oppression, survived, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Her life continued with its share of challenges, as all lives do, but she faced each one with the same courage and determination that had carried her through the events of that fateful day. She knew that the lessons she had learned about resilience, justice, and the power of human kindness would guide her for the rest of her life. The village, too, carried those lessons forward, slowly building a community rooted in fairness, respect, and hope. Maria often sat by her garden at sunset, reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the fear she had faced, the courage of the cowboy, and the strength she had discovered within herself. She realized that her life had been forever changed, not just by the events of that day, but by the choices she had made afterward, to stand tall, to help others, and to embrace courage and compassion in everything she did. And so, the widow who had once been pinned to the ground, who had faced cruelty and fear, became a symbol of hope and resilience. Her story reminded everyone in the village, and those who would hear it in the years to come, that courage can come from unexpected places, that kindness can change lives, and that standing up for what is right can inspire an entire community. Maria had survived, grown, and flourished, her life forever marked by the bravery of a stranger and her own unwavering spirit.